Then we'll start talking a little bit about if it's worth it for you to move to the cloud or not. How do you really calculate that ROI? What are the aspects that you need to take in consideration? We'll talk a little bit about the advantages and the disadvantages of it. And then we'll have a little couple of minutes of open discussion where Ron and I will share a little bit about our thoughts about the future of security. And hopefully we'll dive into some Q&A coming from you guys. Okay, so what is on-premise and private cloud? So basically, it would be pretty much the same in some ways because you could have a private cloud on-premise. Okay, so premise is basically your facility, your site. You're able to create a cloud service type of infrastructure on your site. What that allows, it gives you basically the ability to create in your domain different types of services that are cloud-based services, meaning the way of consuming those services is more as the cloud services, meaning consuming the software or a specific service from the software versus setting up a whole infrastructure and then building on top of that the service that you want. When we talk about private cloud could also be on the public cloud, meaning on the internet using your own, let's say, your own resources, your own servers, or consuming from a third party such as Amazon, Google, Microsoft, etc., and basically creating your own private network, your own private cloud within the big public cloud. So the public cloud is basically third-party vendors have decided to provide services to anyone that wants, if it's a small business all the way to enterprises, and giving inside their infrastructure, giving different types of services in different levels of layers. So for example, I could reach out to AWS and consume servers, databases. I could consume application levels that are already set up for me, machine learning capabilities, sets up for me IoT capabilities, even video monitoring and analytics. You could set up almost 80 to 90% of the infrastructure only by consuming Amazon services online. So these third parties, cloud providers, are basically creating more and more services and building on top of those services to get to the accuracy that will give us, the consumer, the end user, the ability to use their services without investing additional development to really get to a service that gives value. So hybrid cloud is basically, we would say, a solution that takes advantage also from the public cloud that we just talked about right now, consuming these kinds of services from third parties, and also using your on-premise solutions. Basically, this is an in-between situation, I would say, where there are some services that we feel comfortable having them on the public cloud, but on the other hand, there are services that we have that are important for us that they would stay locally in site and won't be in any risk at all. Now, later on, we'll talk a little bit about the risk of public cloud, but definitely there are companies that are regulated and they have to have their data currently on premise unless they're aware of the standard that is existing on the public cloud, and that satisfies their standard as well. So what is as a service? Basically, if we take those third-party companies where they started with just in the beginning, they started with providing servers as a service, right? So if, let's say, I have a new database that I want to create in my organization or a web application that I want to create, I would be able to go online and consume from them a server that on that server, I'll need to install IIS, .NET Framework, any different components that I need to build up my website. Now, that means that basically the layer of service that they provided for me was the infrastructure. And we could get more services from them because once Amazon has understood that if I buy that server and then I install on it the web applications services that I need to create the web application, then why not just do that all in advance and give me all of that as a service, right? So if we take a look a little bit on the left side of the slide, you could see maybe let's say the traditional on-premise deployment or the basics where it's all on me, right? So I would go, I would look online, find the right server, the hardware that I want, and basically decide what hardware I want to implement for this service. I would put it in my data center. I would set up network. I would configure the software, operating system, and on top of that, all the way to the service that I really want to create on that. So that's the basic traditional on-premise service, basically. Now, if we look at infrastructure as a service model, it means that I would want to basically provide more of those services. So if we take an example of, let's say I am a pizza business, and we're not even talking about technology, right? So when I create a pizza, I need a kitchen, I need the gas, I need the oven, I need to create the dough, I have the topping, I set it up, and then I could cook the pizza basically. So infrastructure as a service says, okay, let me give you the kitchen, let me give you the gas and the oven. All you have to do is build on top of it the service that you really want, that's pizza. Okay. So if we take it to our server side, it's exactly as, okay, I provide a server and database setup, and you need to build on top of it your service. Now, when we grow to platform as a service, that's where basically we're giving the service provider is giving an additional layer in advance. So instead of me baking the dough, I could get a pre-made dough, and all I have to do is set up the topping the way I want, the visual, and then just cook it and sell it, right? So that's already an additional layer where I could say, for example, I want a database service, and then inside that database, I will put my data or the points that I want and the connections that I want. Now, when we talk about software as a service, that's basically going all the way to the end, saying, okay, I understand that this is a pizza business. And when I understand that this is a pizza business, I know that pizza has a kitchen, gas, oven, pizza dough, toppings, and then they also need to cook the pizza, right? So why wouldn't I do that and just offer pizza as a service? So when you want, you just consume that pizza ready made, right? And that's basically shifting the responsibility towards the service provider versus the consumer setting all that up.
Okay, so building on that analogy about pizza as a service, which is interesting. Let's take a look at what security as a service might mean. So if we try to define that, we can define that as security as a service is really a concept where users can consume all the security functions they need without taking on the burden of investing in and managing the assets related to that. For example, the infrastructure, the hardware, software, etc. As customers have started to realize, and there's increasing demands on their resources. Basically, they have to do more for less resources. So they have to rely more on technology and external services. So traditionally, on-premise installations, NSI is really just responsible for installing hardware, cabling, installing possibly some servers, maybe some software, some basic setup, and that's it. They pass it on to the user or to the client, which is the security team, and they have to take it and pick it up from there. If you take a look at the security team at the client side, first on a pre-project, the client would need to consider stuff like risks and needs, possibly create a design, apply for capital budgets, prepare and manage tenders if they do that, and possibly also project management and quality control. And then, of course, post-project, once the SI has passed the project, so to speak, over to the user, over to the security team, They have to, in many cases, have to finish the system setup. They also have to deal with administration, manage credentials, maintenance, troubleshooting, monitoring, and on top of all that, continue to learn about new developments, new technologies, so they're on top of all that. Now, some companies may have already outsourced parts of this or bits and pieces of this, like you can hire a company to do a design, you can hire a company to do basic maintenance, but still the client as a whole needs to monitor and manage and basically be responsible for everything. And that takes resources. And using security as a service model, the vendor will actually take on more responsibilities for the infrastructure and simply provide the services and functions that the client needs and wishes to consume. Now, we're already seeing elements of this happening mainly in North America at this point, and mainly around software still, and a little bit around video. So you're seeing bits and pieces of this on the software, video, some of the access control. But eventually, as the technology gets more mature, we'll be able to offer a full range of security functions as a service, which includes everything from the hardware, the infrastructure, the software, managing all that, plus the actual operations as well. Now, we'll go over the next few slides, we'll go over some of the possible services that such a setup can open for all users out there. So let's move on to the next slides, Avichai.
Great. So after explaining a little bit about what's going on the cloud, the concept of public, private, hybrid, and really trying to explain how the security will be implemented in the same structure. Let's see a little bit about what's going on in the industry. Before we really dive in, I would like to say is that we do see that there is a difference of opinion between different vendors and also security integrators in this case, understanding where is their relevancy in this whole world of cloud services. So if we look at video solutions, what we could see these days is different, let's say, architectures for video connection, right? So we could see that there are needs that come from clients that are talking about storage archiving. So their need is to save money on cold storage that's not required, and to save space and electricity, and to have that data available in different sites and different sites, and basically it's cost effective. We could also see a situation where, let's say I have on-premise video solution, but I want to start using analytic capabilities. And those analytic capabilities are provided by a different vendor that connects from the cloud. So usually in that kind of connection, we would have some kind of gateway that creates a secure connection between the on-premise video system to that analytic tool. And another approach would be connecting a camera directly to the cloud. So we've seen several vendors that we also are working with created their own proprietary cameras. And those cameras take in consideration also cybersecurity and connectivity, and really connect directly to the cloud with no need of a server or gateway on premise. And that itself is amazing. Around the access solutions, so we could also, it's very similar, the whole, let's say, commodity versus propriety. So we see that there are some vendors that have decided to go with the approach of creating their own proprietary hardware and using that hardware to have a secure connection to the cloud, versus companies that are saying, okay, I understand that the clients are still going to use Mercury panels. So now I need to be able to adapt to that and create a connection between those panels to my cloud service. And how do I do that in a secure way? So we see those two different approaches in the access control industry. We do see hybrid solutions where where let's say we have a facility that has a legacy system, and now you want to take a new facility that you create or part of the current facility and connect that to the cloud as cloud services, but you want to have an overall visibility of what's on the cloud and what's on premise. So such a hybrid solution also exists, and you're able to connect between a server that's on premise to the cloud service and really get an overall service for your access. The integration of video with access control. So definitely that's something that also before cloud solutions, it's something that's been required. But now we see that the cloud-based solutions are almost native to those video solutions, in a way that your visibility of access logs or your visibility of video footage on the other end is it's correlated, and you get much more data in front of you in an easy way. Under the access, we also see that identity management is key. We understand, the industry understands how identity management from your domain or from other methods that you manage your identities, if it's schools, to really connect that with the access policies.
Now, this one more thing here, Avichai, what Avichai didn't really mention here is that because of this sort of ready for integration, it actually lowers the cost for users as well, which is an important point for all this too.
Right. Okay, so integrated solutions. So something that we've seen, and Blue Ocean has been founded also based on some of these requirements, saying that there's different services that we need to add into the overall security management system. There's the more familiar ones, such as visitor management or a connection with space scheduling. And there's also the connection of time attendance and the POS connected directly to the security systems. And even the more revolutionary type of integrations, where you take a building management system and you connect it with the security video solutions, and basically creating a more IoT tagged type of solution, and we'll talk about that. So edge analytics, right? This concept is very relevant also to the COVID era, and we have to mention COVID during this webinar because the impact on security from the COVID is meaningful. The responsibility has grew. The challenge to manage your resources on site remotely is even more relevant these days. And we've seen how vendors that have cloud-based services are able to create additional features and implement them in an immediate way, so without any downtime or changes in your operations. We also see the whole concept of creating the analytics on the camera, meaning not sending the footage to a server that will process it and then create that analytic. And basically creating it directly on the camera that saves a lot of time and security of the data. So we see features such as people counting, social distancing, mask wearing, heat map. Those are the main features that are really COVID relevant, I would say. You could also have some kind of time attendance. You could see how you protect your environment and if there's any objects around you. So really the analytics is getting there, and it's very based on your needs, right? So if there's any type of need that you have that's unique to your facility, these days it becomes more and more available for you to create that service for yourself. So when we talk about the IoT, security IoT, this also connects a little bit to the facility, and we, from our research and understanding, we know that there is a trend that's coming from both sides. If it's from the building management and if it's from the security management systems, is to basically connect all the resources that I have in the facility to those systems, to the security system. So if we're talking about, for example, environmental sensors, that are temperature, humidity. If we're talking, if basically connecting that to the security system that will be able to analyze that data and also create policies based on that data. Asset tracking, if we need something that's mobile, on the move, we need to track it, we need to know what's going on with it. That's available these days. The entry and exit. So for example, instead of putting a whole setup of access control, if we know that the access is not the issue, but we want to monitor what's going on on that line, meaning people coming in and out, we don't have to have an access control system connected there, but we could put a sensor that will sense all that out. So the opportunity that security IoT gives you is not only additional visibility of resources on your site, but also the ability to save money and use different types of technology instead of the current technology that you set up. So around identity and access management, Blue Ocean has been focusing around education and campus solutions. And basically, we've seen that there are cloud-based services that are very geared towards the education industry. We also see that in other segments in the market, but we could see that there's much more mature products around the campus solutions, where basically you're able to connect all the services that the students consume on the campus to the security system, and having one identity on site instead of using different services and creating new identities for each student. So instead of a student walking around with 2 different cards and his phone mobile and his credentials for his e-learning system, now all he has to do is walk around with his mobile phone and we could see everything. We could consume the printers, we could take a book from the library, we could schedule a space in the facility, and many more. Cybersecurity. So something very interesting that happened between the traditional security and cybersecurity, let's say. We see how cybersecurity is much more connected to the traditional security than we thought. As we know, cybersecurity is mainly parked by the IT department. So the IT department needs to take in consideration cyber threats when they create any type of solution. But as the security industry, where's our awareness about the cyber threats, right? And us, Blue Ocean, have been focusing a lot around that, building up awareness, first of all, and that's key for cybersecurity, is to have that awareness in the facility, people understanding what are the threats that we're protecting ourselves from. Really creating and going over all the white papers that security products have these days is very important for the cybersecurity. But one thing that we could see is that once you consume a cloud-based security service, a lot of that is not an issue for you. If we go back to the chart of the pizza, let's say that's the topping, and we take control of the topping. Another thing that's very important is penetration testing. So I don't know how many are familiar of this concept, but basically in the cyber world, there's a test that hackers try to break into any type of system that you give them. And in the end of that, they create a report saying, okay, these are the weakness points that you have in your system or in your facility or your environment. It really depends on the scope. And these are my recommendations for you, how to make it better, and hardening the environment, basically. Mobile devices. So mobile devices is key. It's key for the end user, for the person that is in the facility, meaning the credentials to access different areas in the facility. And we see the user experience of consuming resources in general in the facility, that they would be mobile based, meaning, for example, visitor management. I have a visitor coming to the office tomorrow and I want to set it up. So set it up in a mobile friendly environment is very important. And we see how security managers are starting to manage the security remotely, right? So even the remote management is kind of a new concept, but here we're already talking about managing remotely on a mobile device with all the functions that you have um, in a traditional way of managing services.
The mobile devices is interesting because there is a shift in credential management, whereas in the past there was only a card. Today we're able to use mobile devices as well. And it's interesting because you can increase convenience while increasing security at the same time. Whereas in the past, if you increased convenience, you would be reducing security. So that's an interesting trend. So about remote operations center, another word for this is SOC, or security operations center. This is interesting, and one of my own little pet projects here. SOCs, used to be only available for the largest organizations, like the big global companies, the Microsofts, the Ciscos of the world, where they have, huge resources. And it was always it was envy, smaller organizations that didn't have those resources. They were a bit envious about this because everybody can use this. And it was only available to the largest organizations because of the high cost due to the investment in infrastructure and the actual running of these SOCs. But today, an SOC can really be available as an option to smaller organizations as well. And this is mainly because working on the cloud means there is no need to invest in these large infrastructures. Even if you're not totally working on the cloud, but you could take advantage of some of the cloud readiness of a system that already brings you closer to that. Another option is where we're able to provide this as a shared service, which further reduces the cost for users. So basically, you're able to, like many things that the internet and the cloud has brought to society as a whole, you're able to gain much more at a much lower cost. So you can have the same functions as Microsoft or Cisco has, even if you have a smaller organization. This is very powerful. And obviously stuff like COVID just reminds us how important it is to have a central monitoring or a security operations center that can be used not just for managing security, but also helping and assisting our employees as well. Another benefit that this brings us is disaster recovery ready. So basically, we know today, especially in light of COVID, but even before that, we knew as security professionals that we need to be ready for potential disasters that may hit us. And having a SOC, a security operations center, especially one that can be mobile, that can be moved around, is very, very important and creates an agile organization that we can help set up. And of course, this also helps us with efficient managing of manpower as well, as this can be moved around and it provides us maximum flexibility. So definitely something that we should be looking into. And I would recommend all companies of all sizes to be considering this in their toolkit. So looking at security as a service and some of the potential functions that are easily available as we go into the cloud, you might ask yourself, is this right for you? And of course, this is just a trend, and you may be considering if this is right for you today or maybe in the future. But if you see that there are certain companies that this is definitely right for you, and there are those that may be less right. So if you're a company that has, you're integrated with sort of highly proprietary systems, this may be an issue because there's more closeness. You don't have that openness that this would require. Another sort of industry that may be restricted is what we call like strict compliance needs. So there are certain companies that have certain government regulatory compliance issues that do not allow them to be open in any way. So think For example, an electricity plant or of course a nuclear plant, for example, obviously have to have totally what you call airtight systems where there's no connection at all to the outside world. So there are certain industries obviously it's not going to work with. On the other side of that spectrum, a hard yes would be if you fall into this list in any way. Most companies today need to do more with less resources. This helps you a lot. If you're in a situation where you need to consume services on a pay-as-you-go type of scenario, this would be good for you. If you're in a high growth demand, some companies are growing even today with COVID, and this would help to roll out your infrastructure faster, for example. The need for more business intelligence. Today with the movement with big data, for example, there is more and more availability to use that for business intelligence that goes beyond just security, and you can provide more value for your organization. And a great extra points there for the security team. If you have diverse operational needs, things that come up on a regular basis that you need to comply with or to answer in any way, this would help you for that. Needs of flexibility as well. And even dealing with multiple legacy systems. There are ways today where you can put a layer on top of multiple legacy systems and manage them all from one central operation center. These do exist today. And finally, having a tighter connection between cyber and physical security. We all know that there's more and more overlapping between cyber security and physical security. And if we are in the physical security profession, it is our duty to be more aware of the cyber needs and to see what we could do to help with that, because they are related to each other. So you may think about some of these points as you're contemplating or considering or learning more about the general security as a service or cloud options, if they're good for you or not. Now, calculating return on investment, ROI, is also an interesting point. And it's a bit challenging, honestly. There's no direct calculation for this because every company is very different. However, I just want to highlight a couple points here. The first and foremost is really to sit down and to think hard about what are your hidden and indirect costs that you have to pay for that are related to security. And every company has those, and in most cases they don't show up on the P&L in an obvious way, and those need to be thought through. So obviously, one is manpower. Who are you using, or how much time are you using, or how much full-time employees do you have that are related to security? In many cases, somebody might have some sort of responsibility that's related to security that's only 15% of their time. And other than that, they're doing something else. That too is a cost and needs to be considered. Of course, also hardware. You're buying the hardware. How are you monitoring that cost? Product life cycle, et cetera. And of course, including the actual real estate footprint and the cost of that real estate as well. So these are all costs that need to be taken into consideration when you're doing a comparison. Others, of course, is managing the software updates and the downtime that brings. We overlook this sometimes, but actually being on top of all the software updates in itself can be a full-time job sometimes. And people in the IT industry know this very well. In the security industry, we're not always on top of this. And this is an area where, frankly speaking, cyber crooks, cyber thieves can actually take advantage of this, because it's not uncommon that a certain router on the security infrastructure is not updated properly. That happens, and that's a common weak point. And of course, the capital assets themselves, the cost of capital to install new systems. So all these are indirect costs that are examples, and I'm sure you may have others as well. But when you're thinking about, should you go with a security as a service option or do a capital investment and own the infrastructure and manage infrastructure yourself, you want to compare as much as the cost as you can in order to have a better picture. So that's some things to think about. Now here in the bottom, we have some there was a survey done by the SDI magazine in the United States that showed some statistics that I think might be interesting. For example, they found that there's 27% cost savings from reduced IT and updates and server maintenance, increased convenience, around 26%, better scalability, and improved security. So these are some direct data from the SDI magazine that can be useful when you're considering this as well.
Thank you, Ron. So let's, Ron, I wanna talk with you a little bit about the future of security and where we see it going, both from the technology point of view, but also from the security services and responsibility point of view. So maybe you should start a little bit talking about where do you see the future of security on the point of view of the operations and the security departments.
Well, it's interesting. You know, I've been in this business since maybe 1997. Pretty much all the time in Asia, and I have seen the evolution of security from extreme analog to no integration at all to where we are today, and it's very interesting. I guess all in all, to me, the trends seem pretty clear. There will be a continual migration to the cloud in various ways. Security will be more and more IT centric. Big data will be more of an influencer, and will help us with will offer more insights. And there will be more and more ways or more possibilities for integration that go beyond security. And you mentioned a few in the presentation. On top of all that, I believe that security teams will continue to have to deal with more and more demands from their organizations with less and less resources. That's just going to be a fact. I don't see that changing. Even in the light of COVID, security teams are getting more power, so to speak, but they still have to deal with issues with the limited resources, limited teams. So based on all that, what I'm seeing is that more and more security functions will be offered as a service because it simply just makes sense. The technology makes sense and the need makes sense, both on the supply side and on the demand side. And security directors will be able to simply pay for what they need. And that means that there will be less emphasis on the branding of hardware and more emphasis on actually services. So for example, we don't need to know what is the brand of the server machine that sits in a data center somewhere. Is it a Dell machine? Is it an HP machine? Or who cares? It doesn't matter, right? It's not even relevant anymore. So I think the same sort of transition will happen in the security field as well. Like, does it really matter the brand of your reader or your panel in behind the wall? What matters the most is the quality of the service you are getting and the functions that you have. So now obviously some larger companies may fight this a bit, and because they enjoy the sort of the current status quo. But everybody, including the larger companies, are developing products that will be cloud enabled, and we're seeing that. We're also seeing a lot of new and creative startups that are developing newer products for the security industry that are very exciting, and I look forward to working with them in the future.
Great. So I want to add a little bit from the, let's say, technology point of view, and trying to really take my experience from IT departments and see what's going on in the security, and really try and predict a little bit what we will see is that's going to happen. So from my experience, something that's very interesting is that when I started in IT, and in the end of the day, there was a server that needs to be installed. You set it up, and you give it to the client, and he starts working on it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and the same thing in security, meaning Security needs access control. I give them access control system, and I let them go on from there and continue with their business. Now, what happened in the IT is that um, the flexibility that was created from the technology, the ability to customize in very different ways, gave the service providers the opportunity to really provide everything as a service, meaning to go even closer to the specific requirements that that client needs. Now, what we see also in security that's starting to grow now is that, first of all, there is understanding in some security departments that their knowledge needs to change, meaning they need to think about other points of their security responsibility, things that they weren't available to think about so far. And on the side of the integrators or the service providers around security, we see that there is much more openness, and that's something that came from the IT trend, meaning let's create open applications where you could program and add on top of it integrations or services. And in addition to that, let's create a community around those products, meaning I want to hear what others have to share. And if someone created a specific model, he could upload it to a code space where we could all use that code. So these are things that we see coming together in the future of security. And at this point, let's move to a little bit Q&A. Let's see what we got here.
Yes, I'll just like if anybody wants to, if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or to write it in the question and answer section. But I'd just like to wrap up with another with something else here. You know, as this is definitely the trends. You know, it's just a matter of sooner or later. And I would highly recommend that you continue to monitor these developments and all the ways you can, and we'll continue to try to update everybody as we can as well. But also try some of the functions if you can. Try some of them if you have an opportunity to try, for example, video on the cloud or something, some component of this. Give it a try. You know, the costs now are much lower than before, and that will give you a chance to experience and also to possibly get to use to that fact. You know, some organizations are still a little bit fearful of opening their system to a cloud. And by doing that, that might help you with that.
And actually, it's right that they have their concerns about moving to the cloud, and that's why it's very important to have as a partner or involved someone that really understands what are the risks that you take when you do that and how to manage it in the best way. So questions, Ron, is it on the chat?
So nothing up here yet. Looks like that's great. I will say, Avichai, that, and for to all the listeners out there, we will be planning some webinars with some live demos. We are working with some interesting companies that have some interesting new products. So hopefully we'll be able to bring those to you in the form of some demos so you can see some real things in action as well.
Great.
Of course, if you are located in Singapore or Beijing or Shanghai, or even India, and you want us to come over to your place, if that's available, we can do that as well. Okay, we have one question here, Avichai. As we moved storage into the cloud solutions, what safeguards do you have to protect the data and personal data?
I see. Okay, that's a good question. Let's understand a little bit about what type of data are we sending to the cloud. Okay, so if we're sending to application-based data, that means that basically we need the cloud service to be aware of this application. So for example, if we're talking about a video management system that we want to share the storage, let's say the data that's created on the system to a cloud service, We need to map it in a secure way. Now for that, there's different solutions. Let's say if we take AWS, so you have ways where you could create, first of all, a secure connection, and you could send it in at the application level, or you could send it in the data level. So that sounds a little bit complicated, I would say. But let's say we could send it within the application, meaning the video management system knows that it has a logical unit on the cloud, and that would be connected to their service. Or we create a process where once the data has been created on premise, it's sent in an encrypted way to that storage, and that storage is not related to the system literally, but for us it's related. So
Avichai, can I add on to that, you know, the concept of cybersecurity and safeguards, the reality is that AWS or Google or Azure, those professional data centers are going to have a higher degree of security on the storage level than most organizations would have for their on-premise servers. That's a simple fact.
Definitely. Definitely, they have security methods, but if I understood the question correctly, it's more about the lower level of not the infrastructure, but how do you keep it safe on the application level? Um, and that's where it comes into, you really need to identify your needs, right? So I didn't even talk about performance. That is also a factor here. So when you're talking about how to archive storage on the cloud, you're not only thinking about in what ways do you want to keep it secure, but what performance do you expect from it? How many times are you expected to reach into that data on the cloud, meaning you want to read from it, or it's mainly a write intensity type of storage? And there's many more questions that need to be answered on that. But overall, the general concept is that those third parties, Amazon, Google, Azure, or others, are really providing some type of standard to start with and to feel secure in doing that kind of connection. And from here, the flexibility is really about your specific needs.
So if you're concerned about that, one thing you could try is you could first try out some what you would consider as non-critical data for this, and you can also get your IT people involved, and they can do an audit and audit that whole process so that they can they can sign off on their approval and feel comfortable with that as well.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
Great. It looks like there's no more questions. So we can, it's 5:22 now. Anyway, thank you all for joining us today. Please look out for some future webinars. Feel free to reach out to us on the contacts you see on the screen now if you have any suggestions or if other questions in the future come up. We would be, one of the things that is important to us is to share information and to make sure that people know what's out there so they can take full advantage of that. We also have a podcast on our website as well, which we talk about various subjects that you may find interesting. So Avichai, with that, thank you again. And thank you everybody for joining us today, and hope you all have a great evening.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.